welcome viewers to the Live Long podcast. I'm honored today to be joined with Sam Copeland. Sam is the director of content for chess.com. Chess.com is the largest board game website and I think also the largest chess website. It started in 2007. It's been very aggressive about buying other companies out, and apparently it's a really profound place. So I'm very happy to be joined with someone at the heart of online chess, really. And more than that, Sam also has some other interesting activities. He has a YouTube channel, which I highly recommend. I'll include a link to his YouTube channel down below, as well as to his blog, which is frequently updated. So you'll find that in the video description of this video. And also, Sam has a company called Strategery, which I find
Strategery, yeah.
Strategery, okay. It's a cool name, which promotes chess learning in his home state of South Carolina among the youth. So, Sam, thank you for joining us.
Absolutely. It's a pleasure to talk with you. I really, really enjoy getting to talk about chess any chance I get. And you mentioned that chess.com is one of the biggest board game websites. To toot the chess.com horn a little bit, we just crossed into the top 300 websites on Alexa. So that was huge for us. And they break that down by category. And one of the categories is gaming. And we're number 2 behind Twitch. We passed Epic, which is Fortnite and such. So you could break that down different ways and you come out with different metrics. But it's really exciting for us to have chess.com in that conversation with all of the, popular titles and, modern video games and such.
That speaks to something that I was unaware of, which is that chess is still very popular among the newer generation.
Absolutely. We've had, I think a great success over the past decade and seen just tons of people get into chess of all ages. But also, in the unfortunate era of COVID, we've seen a lot of people try chess out as, an interesting opportunity to learn something kind of new that maybe they've had a lifetime interest in. That's also kind of competitive when so many other competitive activities are kind of denied to us right now.
Yeah, absolutely. That's very true. Most of my listeners are gym goers, so they're we're all suffering quite a bit with that. So
absolutely.
Sam, let's get to know you a little bit better. I just wanted to know your story with chess. How did you, or when and how did you get involved with chess personally?
My dad taught me the game probably when I was like 6 or 7. He didn't know all the rules, but he taught me what he did know. I remember that when I was around that age, we played checkers on a board that we made. We didn't have much money at all. And we made like a cardboard board and we used milk bottle caps. So like the skim milk had one color and the whole milk had another color. And we made a checker set with that. And then he taught me chess kind of after we had played checkers for a while. And then when I was about 10, I found books at the library. And I always loved puzzle books. Like they would have riddles and other things. And I found that they had chess books and they could do like mate and twos and things. And that's when it really became a thing for me. I did a lot of the puzzle books and basically read every book they had. And then eventually I figured out they have chess clubs and chess tournaments. And I got into that when I was maybe 15 or something like that and kind of wrote it from there.
Which city is it that you grew up in South Carolina, if I might ask?
Columbia, which is the capital. We're in the center. And we have actually a great library, which is where I found all of the chess books. And I loved reading. And the library always had new stuff I could get into. We were one of the top libraries when I was younger, and I would just, read whatever I could there. But when I was getting into chess, it was a little more difficult than it is now because it was the kind of late 90s. And the internet was a thing, but there was no such thing as chess.com. Or other sites like that. And it was really hard to find like a club or connect with other people who had that interest, right? You knew that there must be other people in the city. Out of 400,000, there must be people who could play with me. But to find them actually took literally years before I found some advertisement for a club and was able to connect with other people.
So did your life take a progression that involved chess from the start? So once you got it, was this like an overwhelming passion throughout your teenage years, and then did it continue to be after high school?
Yes, absolutely. I had other passions, certainly. And I definitely didn't think that I would end up kind of doing chess as a career. That has become massively more possible today with the possibility to teach online and things like that. So many more people are making a career out of chess than used to be able to. Uh, but it was always an interest of mine. I think the only time that I wasn't really engaged with chess was after undergrad when I went to graduate school and I kind of lost my chess contacts in a new city. And I took about 3 years where I was, maybe playing online and such, but not competing or anything like that. So that was the kind of one period after I really got into it that I had a little bit of a hiatus.
Out of curiosity, what did you study in undergrad and grad school?
In both cases, geography. Geographic information systems was my focus. I did an undergrad, and then I went in and I did a PhD program at the University of Buffalo, but I left it, and I was ABD because I eventually figured out that academic research just wasn't that interesting to me. I liked the academic environment. I liked teaching. I did a lot of graduate student teaching, but I did not enjoy putting out a paper that 10 people might read. And that whole process ultimately was kind of soul crushing for me.
For the viewers that might know, he means that he was all but dissertation, which means he finished his core coursework, but then decided not to complete his dissertation. I'm very curious, how do you get involved in geography? What is inspirational about that? I've never met anyone who specialized in that.
I think that's another thing that I always thought probably would be in my career for obvious reasons. Having gone that far down, studies in geography. As a kid, I did the geography bee. I love that. I don't know who kind of did that in middle school. I was, at the state level, I was in like the top 10 where they do that competition. Some people might have seen the kind of spelling bee documentaries that are popular these days. And the geography bee is kind of the same thing. But I also just really loved reading about and hearing about other cultures and places, both the, people and just the environment. So I connected with that. And when I went to undergrad, I did geographic information systems because that was kind of a hot technology, like the stuff behind Google Maps and things like that. So it was like, this is a thing that is actually something I can make a career out of, built off of what I love. Because before geographic information systems, if you studied geography, it meant you taught geography in high school or something like that. Your career options were not super broad, but then geographic information systems really kind of blew up the field of geography and really brought it much more to the fore in terms of social sciences.
I see, because I was thinking, geography must have been a very hot topic for millennia, actually, until at one point, we knew most about, but I see what you meant about the information systems. That's very interesting.
Right. It's hard to be like the new Charles Darwin or someone, like that. That's true that there were scientists studying geography and history and all of these other things, but it was hard to make a career until geographic information systems made that more topical, I guess.
That's very fascinating, actually. Did you end up? I assume that part of the interest in geography was, like you said, an interest in other cultures and places foreign to you, and I assume that you weren't traveling that much in your youth. So you didn't get to leave the US, for example, to see the other cultures. Did you end up going and traveling the world and seeing all these places that you had studied so much in maps?
Not nearly as much as I would like. Travel is expensive. And there's someone, Bill Perkins, who put out a book recently who talks about the notion that your opportunities in life, are kind of backloaded, right? You often have the most money and ability to travel late in life. but your ability to get enjoyment out of travel is front loaded in terms of your life, right? You're in your 20s, and I can go to Europe and I'll have amazing experiences that I'm able to take advantage of because I'm younger and healthier. I can travel more cheaply for lots of reasons. And the experiences I have will affect the rest of my life, right? Whereas if I go when I'm 60, there's much less of an impact. And I certainly have not had the money to travel. When I was young, I've been able to travel through graduate studies to Italy and China. And since I've been able to travel a bit more, like to Mexico and some other places in the Caribbean and such. But my travels have been much more limited than I would like. And now I have, maybe some more money to travel, but I just don't have the time. That's, just really challenging to like take a week off or something like that, and I've got a young daughter and so forth. So it's always interesting to think about the opportunities that you have in life and kind of how they're structured. It's unique. I've done a lot more travel in the United States where I visit a lot of national parks and do things like that.
This is actually a very interesting point. I had heard the name Bill Perkins before, but I don't know who he is. I'll check it out after. Do you know the title of the book you're referring to? I'll check it out.
It's Die with Zero. I just listened to an interview he did with a chess and poker player, Jen Shahade, on her podcast. So poker players might be interested in that. But she does a lot of stuff that discusses some cognitive topics and things. But I think that his book is doing well. I think it's ranked on the New York Times bestseller list. But he's a businessman, poker player, and so forth.
So it's really quite interesting. There's something I always observed and respected in South Asian cultures, particularly in the Indian subcontinent, where I noticed like even my Indian friends, even if their families are not wealthy, they have such a strong family basis to their lifestyles that the parents will save. I mean, the grandparents save for them, then the parents will save for the children. And so they'll enable the children to take advantage of these kind of things with the expectation that the children will also save and pass along to the next generation. Whereas in the U.S., we sort of get this impression, or even some of us like myself are told, you're out when you're 18, you go figure it out, or before then, and you start from scratch each time. So you can't really optimize this time-related decision making. But another thing,
right, absolutely.
Another thing is this phrase that older people say often, which is that youth is wasted on the young, because when you're young, you sometimes don't recognize the value of things or know how to use your time as well as you can when you're older, but then you become feeble, which is why I'm so focused on not becoming feeble. And that's essence of what my channel is about. Anyway, this is really interesting. Final question I wanted to ask you. So how do you, now I know so little about this competing in chess thing, but do you do that as a hobby? How do you compete? Are the competitions national or international, local, regional? Is that how it is? I used to be an arm wrestler, so that's the only thing I really know about competing.
So chess competition is really interesting. I find it to be incredibly rewarding. That's one of the things that I really enjoy about chess is that it's a competitive outlet that you can enjoy your whole life. Right. And many things are not really that way. I mean, you can find like, some city soccer league or some city baseball league, but it's really not that interesting to compete, when you're in your 30s or something like that or further forward. Whereas in chess, you can play, up until your 70s or something. Competitively, the people who can make a living, are the people who are in like the top, honestly, 20 in the entire world in terms of making a living just by winning tournaments. That's a small group of the population. It's maybe getting a bit larger as we're seeing more money, more funding in chess, but still it's a really small part of the population. But many more people make a living through chess via teaching because people engage with it on, some kind of after school program level or, private coaching or other things like that. In terms of the competitions, then what most people are going to play in is nothing that's connected to the top levels of chess, but you'll be able to go and join an open tournament like the South Carolina Open or North Carolina Open or something that's, much, much bigger, like the World Open, which is held in either Philadelphia or Washington, D.C., kind of depending. I think it's been in Philadelphia for the last several years. And you'll play in something like that, and you'll get put into peer groups based on your rating, which is an estimate of kind of your skill level. And so you'll play people who are all in the same peer group, and you'll try to, amass as many points as possible. Like you have 9 games, you'll try to win 8 games and get 8 points out of 9 or something, and win your section and so forth. So it's really something where anyone can play at any point, and you're kind of competing within some peer group of some sort. My level is a master level, which is nowhere near the top of any tournament. I'm not going to be expected to win something larger than a regional tournament. But I'll usually be in the top section. So like in the tournaments that I'll go to, like the World Open or something like that, I would compete in the open section, which is where the top peer group is. There might be maybe 100, 200 players in that peer group, including, players competing in the US Championship and so forth, down to kind of journeymen like me.
Okay, I have several questions from what you just said.
Sure.
Let's start with the last thing. The term master, and we often hear the term grandmaster. What defines that term? How do you become one technically?
So grandmaster is the highest title in chess, outside of like world champion, but that's a different kind of title. It's, winning a world championship match. It's not, here's a set of performance metrics, achieve that, you get the title. So grandmaster in chess is someone who has a rating in the international rating system of 2,500 or better. And many people who've played some kind of online game might have gotten a rating. I know that Yahoo Billiards used to have ratings, and it was the same thing. And the rating systems actually come from chess, and RPAD ELO developed systems that are used in all kinds of things, like whether it's Go or League of Legends, they all have rating systems. Tinder has a rating system that evolved from chess. I'm serious. When you get matched, it's matching you based on an ELO, which is what we use in chess and what we invented for chess. It was first used in chess. So it's a very widely used system. In chess, like the kind of peak rating of all time is 2881 from Magnus Carlsen. And a grandmaster has to get to a 2500 level. And they also have to play 3 tournaments that are international caliber tournaments and perform well enough to get what's called a grandmaster norm, which the idea is that this performance in this tournament is a world-class performance. So you get 3 world-class performances, you get the rating of 2,500, and you become a grandmaster. And there's, I'm going to get the number wrong, but something like 1,700 active grandmasters in the world, which is kind of a lot depending on how you think about it. But, many countries don't have a grandmaster. Some countries have quite a few, like Russia, for example. And in general, it's much more difficult than, for example, a PhD. Not that that's not a great achievement, but, if you think about 1,700 total grandmasters in the world, that's a very small percentage of the players who play chess throughout the world.
So I will spend my own time looking into the metrics of how it's made, but I just want to be clear about one thing. So you get points. That 2,500 point system is based on points depending on who you played, right? So it depends somewhat on the points that the person you're playing has, and then if you win,
right?
Okay, so it's fairly
right. The basic idea is 3 possible results, right? Win, draw, loss. So if I play you and your rating is 2,000, if I draw you, my rating for that game is 2,000, same as your rating. If I beat you, we'll take your rating and we'll add some points, say 400. So we'll say my rating for that game is 2,400, 400 plus 2,000. If I lost, then my rating for the game would be like 1,600. And I assume that the way Tinder does it is like if you get swipe right, like they take the rating of the person who's like swiping on you, and then maybe you get some points added. If they swipe the other way, then you get their rating and you subtract some points, something like that. I know that they have an internal system that's been published, but I don't know how it works exactly.
They do have a system. You can optimize that system as well. There's a hack to. But okay,
Right.
so that's really fascinating. I want to ask you a couple more questions. So you said that the Worlds is always in Philadelphia or Washington recently. Does this mean that the U.S. that chess is U.S. centric?
No, the World Open is a large open tournament, one of the largest out there that will have, I'm not actually sure, but say something like 2,000 competitive players who come and compete. But it could be named anything, right? So Australia, China, they could run a World Chess Classic or something. The World Open has its stature, not from the name, which is not exclusive to that tournament, but just from the legacy of having been a kind of top tournament for decades. So it's existed for a really long time. But there are many fantastic tournaments all around the world that one could point to that have really great legacies and have been held for a long time.
So when if you play online, does your rating change like if you played at a tournament or?
Mm-hmm. It's a separate rating system. So every chess site has a different rating system. You have a rating system through the U.S. Chess Federation, and you also have an international rating. And so they'll be kind of on the same scale, but they'll be different. So chess.com, if you play there, you'll get a rating. And the idea is that it should be similar to what your U.S. Chess Federation rating is if you play actively through the U.S. Chess Federation. But we have, literal millions of American players who play on chess.com who've never played a tournament game in the United States. So they won't have a rating that way, much less an international rating, which is a smaller pool of players in the most serious tournaments.
Got it. Just briefly, maybe we should discuss the private coaching later. The last thing I want to ask, are there divisions according to age, specifically in terms of masters or older, I don't know if they want to call it masters, I guess, in chess, but older people, are they given a handicap or something?
No, there's no handicap, but there is some of that. One thing that I think is really interesting in chess is that in a lot of ways, age is irrelevant, right? You can have a 5-year-old kid playing a 90-year-old player. There are videos on YouTube of games where you literally have junior players playing, world champions who are now seniors and doing well against these players. They do have tournaments that are scholastic in nature, so that the players for that tournament will be only players under the age of 20 or something like that, so that you're competing against your peers. Often there will be an elementary prize, a middle school prize, high school prize, however you want to do it. Might be age-based, under 15, so forth. And there's also some senior tournaments that are for players who are 65 plus, but the largest tournaments don't use any age restrictions. And you'll see 9-year-olds playing in open tournaments. The last tournament that I got to play, an offline tournament at least, I played in January, and I played a 9-year-old kid who was the strongest nine-year-old kid in the country. And he already had my rating. So he was already a master, which is, not an insignificant achievement. It's not Grandmaster, but to get to master at 9 is really impressive. And he beat me. He did really, really well. I had a pretty good tournament, but he still beat me in that game. And he played, honestly, very, very well. He also just won a big online tournament against some top juniors that were all 10 and under. So he's quite a talented kid. But you'll have that mix of ages playing together in chess.
That's really beautiful, actually. And so we're going to get into the details because I really want to understand what does playing good mean, actually. But before we do that, I just want to mention briefly to the listeners, because I want to make clear why I'm personally interested in chess and why I believe that most of the listeners of my channel should be as well. So the study of chess and how it affects cognition began in the late 19th century, toward the end of the 19th century. And the study of it, although there were initial studies, the really interesting studies happened in the mid 20th century. In fact, Claude Shannon, the founder of information theory, wrote a paper on chess I was reading actually. That's where the idea of this artificial intelligence that would compete with chess players came. It actually came from Claude Shannon himself. But more significant than that is Herbert Simon, who's actually a professor from my alma mater, my undergrad. Herbert Simon is the founder of cognitive science, the study of cognition in the brain, not neuroscience, but cognitive science. And Herbert Simon spent at least 30 years on and off studying chess players, beginning in, I think, 1958 or so, with a landmark paper published in 1973. And then his last paper on the subject was published in, I think, 1998. And it is through his study of chess players that Herbert Simon developed the very famous concept of chunking. I don't know if you've ever heard of it yourself, Sam.
It's ringing a bell, but yeah, I could use a refresher at least.
Chunking is this idea that cognitive processes, which are involved in solving something. So Herbert Simon came up with this concept of expertise as it relates to cognition. So expertise is this idea that, for example, when I look at a chess board, I take a very long time to understand what's going on, and I move very slowly, even in the opening round and even in the closing round. Whereas someone else like you can look at the chess I don't even know what it's called, but the way the pieces are spread out on the board, and quickly come to a conclusion of what he should do. So this idea is expertise. Over time, the expert becomes fluid and quick in decision-making and efficient. And this was observed in all kinds of, obviously there are humans that are experts in all kinds of things. And you may have heard before this this came into the news media and stuff, that it takes 1,000 hours to become an expert in anything. This is from
10,000 hours, right?
Yeah, 10. No. Actually, I think.
Only 1,000? Oh, I've exceeded that by 10, a lot.
Maybe it's 10,000, but that's from Herbert Simon.
Right.
Sure. So Herbert Simon actually developed that from the chess players. And the idea is that basically, I always describe this with long division. When you're a child and you're taught long division, in the beginning, you actually have to think of the steps of what you do with the remainder, how you move it around. And slowly, when you keep doing it, the thing becomes subconscious and you no longer think of what you're doing. That's the process of chunking in the brain, where mental processes are made more efficient. We don't know how it happens in terms of neurons, but we know things become more efficient and quicker in the brain. So basically, that's what Herbert Simon discovered from watching chess players. So he noticed that chess players, for example, when they're given an array of chess pieces on a board, if the pieces are organized in a natural sense, that's something that could come out of a game, they could quickly memorize the whole board in 5 seconds or less. But if Herbert Simon and his colleagues put the pieces in a completely unnatural position that would never happen in a real game, they couldn't memorize it quicker than a novice, or they could only be a little bit quicker than a novice. They also noticed a bunch of other interesting things about chess players. So basically, originally, a lot of times in the academic research, or not academic, in popular discussions, people thought, chess players should be more strategic than normal people in real life. So Kasparov, for example, discussed this in his one of his books that I read when I was younger, saying that, he got into politics, and some people were asking him, are you more strategic than other people because you're, one of the top chess players in history? And he says, it doesn't really apply that much to normal life. Maybe it does make me a little bit more strategic, but not that much. And in fact, a lot of the research shows that, not just on chess, on expertise in general, that the expertise doesn't go across to other fields as much. So you may be very good at recognizing patterns in chess, but it doesn't mean you're good at recognizing patterns among birds' colors or something like that. So this brings up the question of why should anyone spend their time studying chess if they're not naturally intrigued by the game, which seems very intriguing because it's competitive. Like you said, you can continue into old age. You don't have the risk of being knocked out like in the UFC.
Right.
You're going to lose brain cells. We used to say that about arm wrestling. We said this is a great competitive sport because we can only break your arm. You're not going to have a brain trauma. But actually, chess is even better than that. So it's naturally intriguing, but for those who are not naturally intrigued by it, why should you learn it? Well, this is my idea. Basically, I think that There's a couple of reasons, but one of the reasons is that people in our 30s or 40s, a lot of us have careers that are somewhat stale in the sense that what we do is what we do. I'm not talking about a 9 to 5, meaning, a job that's very repetitive, but say, for example, you're an investment banker. What you do all the time is read investment reports, look at your analysts' computer models. You stay in your same subject area. So your brain doesn't learn to become more efficient at new processes very often. And also, as we age, and this is why you'll notice younger chess players in children have some advantages in learning over adults, is that when we're younger, we have a lot of neurotrophic factors. That means chemicals in our brains that allow our brains to grow new neurons in any place of the brain. When you're able to grow new neurons in any place of the brain, you're able to restructure your brain very quickly, which is why children don't often get major depressive disorder, because something traumatic may happen to them, but they're able to reorganize their brains quickly and adapt to that. Whereas adults, our brains become what is called not plastic. I call it static, where our brains can't adapt very easily as we get older. So while playing chess may not make your brain more plastic in general, taking it up as an adult, if you having no experience, like what I'm planning to do myself, right, it may not make your brain plastic, but it definitely challenges your brain. If you're using tools that make your brain more plastic, of which there are many in the world right now, including antidepressants. So SSRIs function by making the brain more capable at creating new neurons in two areas of the brain that like 20 years ago, cognitive neuroscientists discovered the brains actually of adults can make new neurons, but only in two areas. One called the dentate gyrus and one called the subventricular zone. So these new neurons are developed when you take, for example, an SSRI. But what happens is these new neurons, where do they go? If you're not challenging your brain, they have to differentiate and proliferate through the brain. If you're not challenging it with something, we don't know where they go, and we don't know if they become useful. But if you're using these factors in your brain and challenging your brain to learn new things, you will change. First of all, your brain is more plastic, and you'll change the function of your brain. So doing that, I think, has one element which is useful, which is that it may ensure that the neurotrophic factors are being put to good use in terms of developing functional connectivity in your brain. And second of all, although there is no evidence of this, I do think that engaging the brain in that kind of way, especially in adulthood, should provide some attenuation of cognitive decline in older age, although there is no clear evidence of that. What there is evidence of is that the level of degree that you get, so for example, you almost finished your PhD, the level of degree you get when you're younger does attenuate the risk of Alzheimer's disease in old age. But unfortunately, it's not so clear otherwise. So that's what I wanted to mention. One last thing I wanted to mention is there's an interesting stream of research that came out of the University of Texas at Dallas in the last 10 years.
That's where I went to undergrad.
Is it really?
Yeah, it's not a large school, so it's amusing that you've transitioned over there. But they were national champions in chess many, many times. They also had a large geographic information systems program with Brian Barry, who is a legend in the field and formerly an important member of the Harvard team that was driving some key research in geographic information systems. So I went there because it perfectly married my two worlds at the time.
That's incredible. I'm actually also thinking of moving to Dallas myself. I live in California. How did you like living in Dallas briefly before we could?
It would not be my first choice, but I didn't have any bad experiences. Dallas is just a massively sprawling city. It probably sprawls more than any other city in the United States, maybe more than any in the world. I'm probably exaggerating, and I should see counterexamples. But like the downtown area is, denser, but it's not like it's packed with skyscrapers or something. And really, Dallas is just suburbs, 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 suburbs. Millions of people, all who have, a large yard and a suburban house and so forth. But it's, a nice climate. And as a really large city, it has the advantages therein that everything is there. You'll find, whatever your interest is, you'll be able to find some way to sate it, which is always nice. And it's easier to get around into many other cities. A lot of other places, it's very difficult because of traffic and so forth to get from one side to the other. But Dallas is very, very navigable. And I took advantage of that when I was there.
How does it compare, do you think, to living? I'm actually not planning to live in the city. I'm planning to get like a ranch outside just to be
nice.
Yeah, but I wanted to ask you, how do you compare it to Houston and Austin? I mean, I know Austin is a little bit different, but Houston, see, I'm turned away from Houston because of the hurricanes.
So I haven't been around Houston and Austin enough. I've been around a little bit, but I mean, they're still, significant drives away. So the times I was there was when I traveled to a chess tournament from Dallas. My impression would be that Austin is at least the most popular of the three cities. It ranks very highly on a lot of, those lists, best places to live in the United States. I think Dallas is also, up there and is a good place to live. Houston, probably a little less appealing. You're in oil country. It's a much more industrial vibe. It's hotter. There is the hurricane problem. So of the three, I would be inclined to recommend Dallas or Austin based on the geography that interests you. Austin is known for, I think, more cultural stuff. There's a lot younger population. They have what is the festival they do? I can't remember. But there's the big social media gathering every year that's really a big deal, and they also have a lot of bands and so forth. They didn't do it this year, but in general, they have that.
So what's interesting about your alma mater is that they have published a stream of research beginning in, I think, around 2010. Basically, very interesting. So there's a region of the brain called the fusiform face area. And this area basically lights up on fMRI scans when people recognize faces. So obviously, we're actually all experts at recognizing patterns in faces. We're extremely good at that. And in fact, we recognize patterns in faces more with the ethnicities that we grow up around as children than other ethnicities, which is why there's a very insensitive colloquial things on TV sometimes where people say, I don't recognize, they look the same, and just a different ethnicity. It's because you didn't grow up with them when you're younger and you're not as expert actually at recognizing their faces. So It's been found that, it was originally found that radiologists access the same area that other people use for their faces when they look at scans. And that bird watchers did similar things when they look at birds. And your alma mater discovered that chess players use this area, expert chess players, but not novices, use this area when looking at positions on a board, but they use it more when the position is confusing to them, which is interesting. So there's clearly a lot of remodeling in the brain that occurs, so this is something that really is attractive to us in old age. Now I'm going to stop my monologue. I want to learn from you. So let's begin with my general questions about chess. So I have quite a few. We've discussed briefly the internet chess community. I didn't know about Twitch being involved, which I've just learned looking at your channel a little bit. What is the internet chess community like? Where are the hubs? What do people do?
The internet chess community has been absolutely exploding. Chess.com is the largest community, but it's certainly not the only community. And in a lot of ways, I think you could just say that there is just a large community and different sites and other places that people kind of connect and share. On chess.com, we recently cleared 40 million accounts on the site. And, each day we have over 1 million, active members, varying a little bit, of course. But there's just a ton of people playing chess. And there are other popular sites like Lead Chess and Chess24 that also have communities. Many people play on multiple sites as well. And then you mentioned Twitch. There's also Twitch and YouTube, right, which are more of a viewership communities, and it's often the same people. Not necessarily. There are people who watch YouTube chess videos who probably play very little, but obviously there's a lot of overlap. And the Twitch chess community has been probably the largest growing of late. We've been doing a lot of stuff at chess.com. We do an event called PogChamps. We're just doing our second one. where we connect a bunch of popular streamers who have some interest in chess and run a popular tournament. And they're all very, very new players. So it's interesting to see them learn the game and compete and see the different personalities clash and so forth. But that's really been exploding. Today, the world champion Magnus Carlsen played Hikaru Nakamura in the finals of the Magnus Invitational. And the viewership for that on Hikaru's channel, his Twitch channel, which is very popular, was something like 40,000, maybe 43,000 members at peak. I don't know the data, but something like that. And there was a lot of viewership on Magnus's channels through Chess24 as well. So maybe at peak there were 70, 80,000 people watching, just these two players go at it, which is really exciting for us as a chess community.
So I'm a little older for the Twitch thing. So for me, the idea of imagining people watching a video game is really hard to understand. But watching chess seems much more interesting to me. I might end up making an account so I could watch that. I wanted to ask you about the YouTube. So you have a YouTube channel, which I dig into people's research more, but before having a first conversation people's work. But the reason why I wanted to talk to you earlier is because I really wanted to get an introduction to chess to my viewers. But I actually love your videos, and I'm going to go through them a lot. But I wanted to ask you, so your channel has about the same size of subscribers as mine. Are there channels that have large subscribers in the chess world? How many channels are sort of above the 3,000 mark? Is it a big YouTube,
Yeah, there are much, much larger channels. My channel is quite small, though if it's to you, because we are at about the same level.
Yeah, of course.
The largest, actually, you are going to love a video on my channel, and I'm not even trying to sell it. But I did the data. I have one of those, popular graph videos that shows the growth of YouTube chess channels. And I published an update to that like a month ago because there'd been enormous growth this year. So I can be very specific about the data. The largest YouTube chess channel is a Godmatur's channel, Agadmator. He just crossed 750,000. I think within the next year, he's sure to hit 1 million. The fastest growing channels are Hikaru, who I just mentioned, his YouTube channel. I want to say it just crossed 400,000, but it was under 100,000 at the beginning of the year. So he could also hit 1 million subscribers within the next year. And there are several other really, really large channels that I can point to. Chess.com's is, I think, not quite at 400,000 yet. But there are a few others that are over 500,000.
Are they mostly, other than chess.com, are they mostly by famous players, or are there people like scholars of the game, like sort of like yourself, that analyze other games? That's what I find personally more interesting as a beginner to learn from.
Right. Actually, that's rare. There are a few channels, and there are more channels coming about that are run by top players. Hikaru's is really the main example, though. And I can point to a few others that are emerging by Anish Giri and Vidit, top players from the Netherlands and India. And they're very popular, and they're really entertaining people as well. But those are, I would say, more exceptions. The most popular channels like Godmatur's are players who are, a strong amateur level, like myself, maybe a little bit stronger, a little bit weaker. Presenting just amazing chess games, watching for a chess enthusiast of any level, watching a really exciting game that you haven't seen before, if you enjoy the presentation, can be really satisfying. And there are some other channels as well that specialize maybe in kind of presenting for beginners, explaining very basic strategies and things like that. Chess Talk is a channel run by an Indian creator, and it also has maybe 600, 700,000, and it's really beginner focused. And he excels at creating videos that get a lot of traffic from beginners searching for basic concept and tutorial videos on YouTube.
For some reason, I find it difficult to watch those videos that don't have a person on the side. Like, I like how yours, you get yourself with a green screen I assume it's using a green screen, right? Where you're on the bottom.
My background is what you got right behind me right now.
Oh yeah.
I just present in my room. I have a green screen, and I don't really use it very often, just because I don't know that it makes a big difference. I have a yellow wall, and it looks okay.
No, how do you set
And
up
it's
there's a cut version of you on the bottom right of some of the videos.
I have done it for a couple of videos,
Oh,
but
okay.
it's a small amount out of like the 160, 170 videos I've done. Most are most are presenting famous games, and I just use my webcam. I don't uh, do a green screen, and like the most popular channels actually do really straightforward presentations usually.
Mhm.
Just board, webcam, and people like the person presenting and they're interested in the game, and it works.
Yeah, I
That's
was.
one of the things that's I think amazing about chess from a digital media perspective. There's not a lot of video games that you can present in like 244p or 360p or something that could still be watchable. But a lot of audience comes from Africa and India, and I mean, they're not going to be able to usually watch streams of Fortnite or something like that, and really be able to kind of get the most out of it. But a lot of them watch chess. I've actually seen that comment from a lot of people in different countries that they watch in really low res, and they're able to enjoy it on that level.
Well, you take us to our next subject, which is something I'm very curious about myself. I noticed historically, I think that I noticed there was a lot of Slavic chess players from the former Soviet Union and Americans.
Mm-hmm.
Where do you find a higher proportion of chess players in certain regions of the world? I'm talking about the top chess players, not the viewers. You were just talking about viewers coming from Africa
Right.
as well. So where is chess popular, first of all? And then is there an unusual amount of masters or grandmasters in certain regions, like Scandinavia or ex-USSR?
Absolutely. That is a thing. I would say that maybe 100 years ago or more, you could speak about people being interested in chess on a climate level. You would hear about a lot of people in Russia or colder climates being interested in chess because of the long winters, being locked inside in a dark room. Uh, so I don't know if that's true or not, but you would hear colloquially about that, and there seems like some reasonable evidence exists for that, I guess. But today you'll find strong players from all over the world. Certainly there are some countries that have more, but I really think it's more of a cultural thing. Russia and many countries in the former Soviet Union have a lot of strong players. The Soviet Union explicitly supported chess as one of the things that they supported to create the impression of Soviet dominance, and they won many world championships in a row from amazing players that they were supporting. And you can also say the country that has the most grandmasters per capita is Iceland. And there are a few reasons for that, but one reason is that the Bobby Fischer versus Boris Spassky match, the most exciting world championship match that was ever played, which was 1972, and was recently featured in the movie Pawn Sacrifice that had Tobey Maguire. I hope it was Tobey Maguire. That was depicted there. And that match had just a huge viewership in the US because Bobby Fischer was a US player, and in the Soviet Union because he was competing against Boris Spassky, who was a Soviet champion, height of the Cold War and all that. And so that match was held in Iceland. That just happened to be the venue. And because of that, there's been a large interest in chess in Iceland ever since. And so there are more grandmasters there. But every time you see, just a great player emerge who also has a certain celebrity, I think that you see other great players emerging after that. In India, I think you can point to Viswanathan Anand, who's been a hugely popular player, world champion, just a great ambassador of the game. And after he came, he came out of India and had great success. You can track generations in India emerging that have been influenced by him. And right now, India is one of the strongest chess countries in the world. And I really think that that's a function of his success and his ambassadorship in India.
Can I ask you two questions? Have there ever been a top African, or one question, African or Arab chess players ever?
Uh, that is a great question.
I don't think so.
There are some amazing players from Africa, and certainly a millennia ago, the strongest players were
Yeah,
Arab, because
content.
at that time, that's really where chess was thriving. And in Babylon, you really had kind of the center of the world in a lot of ways, with the center for mathematics and the center for chess. And that's where kind of the first published chess games were played that we still have, records of today. Today, there are amazing Arab players like Salem Saleh, who I think is from Saudi Arabia.
Really?
So fantastic blitz player, super exciting player to watch, always aggressive, really nice guy. Another player who's super inspiring who comes from Africa is Bassem Amin. He comes from Egypt. He's the first 2,700. 2,700 is kind of a threshold that you start speaking about someone being more than just a strong grandmaster, but being like a super grandmaster. That's a term we kind of throw around that's not got a specific meaning in chess. There's no like codified definition, but it's just a player who's achieved another level relative to most grandmasters. So he's the first 2,700 grandmaster from Africa, and he's also a medical doctor. So he completed his studies, and that's just a huge achievement. To succeed in two fields like that is really impressive. Also an incredibly nice guy. So both of them I would point to. I also went to school at UT Dallas with Amonsu Matoe, who is a grandmaster from Africa, and I can point to obviously some other players as well. I would say that African and Arab players have probably not had as many opportunities as one would like, right? Just fewer opportunities to compete against top players when they're young, to travel to top tournaments. I think that situation is improving, and online, you really see a difference now, because for a young player, you can play as many games as you want against the top players. And for example, Iran today has an amazing crop of talented players coming up. Alireza Firouzja, Parham Maghsoodloo, who's world junior champion like a year ago. They're also fleeing Iran because of the situation there and the limited opportunities that are emerging. Unfortunately, they've lost almost all their top players, but you do see amazing players coming from these regions, and that they're getting the opportunities to thrive at a young age that I think before the online world existed, they wouldn't have had, or it would have been at least more difficult for them.
That's really fascinating. Thank you for that overview. In the Gulf of Arabia, that's why I was really surprised by Salem Saleh that you described. I'm half Arab, and I spent some years in the Gulf of Arabia, or the Arabian Peninsula, and chess is extremely unpopular there, which is or was, at least when I grew up. So this is really impressive to know that.
What's the term? In Saudi Arabia, it's considered forbidden. There's a specific term. It's not really binding, but
makruh. Yeah.
Sorry?
It's called makruh. Makruh.
Okay.
Yeah. But where that comes from is there was a revivalist movement in Islam that began in the 1700s called Wahhabism. And this revivalist movement sort of, it's basically what would be considered extremism. But basically at that time, it's really hard to explain all of it. But basically at that time in Saudi Arabia, there was a lot of what's called idolatry. Idolatry is like people were putting statues up near graves or praying near graves, which was considered semi-polytheistic and against the monotheism of the Abrahamic religions.
Right.
So this movement came about, and actually this is the movement that carried in the princes of Saudi Arabia into their position, because they allied with the original guy, the Wahhabi guy, and they what's the word for that? But preached,
proselytized.
Yeah, exactly, his thing across Saudi Arabia. And the problem with the chess pieces is they have slightly a depiction of a horse or of something, and therefore technically they could be an idol or a statue. So that's the actual difficulty there. And then
Interesting.
they
I've
also,
also heard that some teachers are opposed because it's associated with like gambling and other gameplay.
I was about to mention that the other side
Right.
of it is that with cards are banned because
Right.
it could be associated with gambling. But for them to ban chess because of that is a bit ridiculous. I mean, people are not really gambling, or I don't know if they are. Are people gambling on chess?
Not really. I recently listened to a podcast where Grandmaster Patrick Wolf was arguing that there should be a lot more betting on chess. Um, it would be an influx of funds that would fund stronger tournaments and so forth. I think that probably in Europe you can bet on the biggest matches, but I don't think it's that much of a thing. Partially because we are so accurate with our estimates of ELO that we know who the favorites are. And you might see upsets, but I think it's just not that interesting to bet when everyone's kind of on the same page about what the chances are for the two players. If you're thinking like football or something like that, I think that there's a greater uncertainty in there, just a lot more variables.
So you mentioned that Bobby Fischer played a famous match in Iceland, which is, by the way, an interesting country that is one of the most genetically homogeneous places in the world. They were founded by about 5 Vikings and about 5 Irish women. The whole
Wow.
country. Yeah, it's really incredible. But they also dominate a lot of sports, by the way. They dominate a lot of the strength sports that I used to be involved in before. But
I mentioned earlier PogChamps, and that starts tomorrow. Just a big chess tournament with celebrities. And one of the players is Hafthor Bjornsson.
yes,
I'm
yeah.
probably mispronouncing his name. I think he's Icelandic.
Yeah.
Yeah. So he's playing in the event, and he's had an interest in chess recently, and he's been learning a lot. And he has a stream on Twitch, and he streams his play and lessons he does and things like that.
Wow, this is really fascinating. A lot of my viewers know about Hafthor.
Okay.
Yeah, he's a really interesting character. He's 400 pounds. I don't know how he gets blood supply to the brain for the chest. That's really difficult. But what I wanted to ask you about is what happened to Bobby Fischer? I don't know the story, but he disappeared. There's some sort of tragic, slightly tragic story. What is it in brief?
I think, as you say, tragic is the right word. The story of Bobby Fischer is very, very sad. I think basically you're speaking about undiagnosed mental illness. As it's undiagnosed, we can't really say exactly what he struggled with in his life, but I think there's no question that he struggled with various mental issues. There is a really, really good video that I watched about a week ago. I'd love to share you a link, and you can put it in the description, where someone has a really excellent psychology channel, a professional, and he speaks about interesting historical figures. I don't know the full breadth of the channel, but he did kind of an analysis on Bobby Fischer, at least presenting different theories and evidence regarding conditions that he had. And he had a lot of paranoia and so forth. As a player, he's arguably the greatest player of all time. You can also speak about Gary Kasparov and Magnus Carlsen today. But the level that he achieved at his peak relative to his peers was just insane. He won 20 games in a row without any draws. You're just never going to see Magnus Carlsen do that. You're never going to see another player in history do that. That was an incredible achievement. But throughout his life, he battled paranoia. He pushed people away. Later in life, it just got worse. He said incredibly misogynistic and anti-Semitic things. A lot of times when we, create content about his great games, which are just beautiful, beautiful games, people will bring that up fairly because it's, an unfortunate part of his life. But I always have the perspective that really that's, not a manifestation of who he really was.
Mm-hmm.
It's a manifestation of the mental illness that he struggled with that really affected everything about his life except the chess he played on the board. He really died very alone in Iceland at the end. I think by the end he'd had, friends who tried to be there his whole life, even at the very, last decade when, he didn't have the fame anymore or anything like that. And he just pushed almost everyone away through intense paranoia and other issues.
Was he, just out of curiosity, was he a substance abuse user? I mean, was he a substance user?
I have never heard of any indication that that's the case. And I think we would know if he had ever abused any substances in a specific and regular way.
Oh, while we're on that topic, can I ask you something? Is there a lot of performance enhancement among chess players in terms of using substances?
That's a really interesting question. Not really. As one Grandmaster said, I don't even remember who it was. If there was anything that would enhance my performance, I would take it. But, basically, there's not really anything that will enhance a chess player's performance. I mean, you might have some ideas, but I would say there are some things you can do to kind of sustain your performance, right, across a 5-hour game or a 6-hour game to make sure you're performing at your peak level. But you're not able to, identify moves that were beyond your ability or play games that were beyond your ability through any substance you take in, right? It's skill and practice and so forth. So there is drug testing in certain contexts associated with the International Chess Federation, but basically there's never been a case, and the stuff that they're testing for, it's not like no chess player is trying to take it to enhance their performance or anything. It's really an unusual situation.
Do you know what they test for?
They test for like the drugs that are tested for by the Olympic Committee, because the International Chess Federation wants to be, a sport at the Olympics. I think that there's a category below being included in the Olympics that is like an Olympic recognition as some kind of sporting activity or something, and they've achieved that. And I don't think chess is ever going to be included in the Olympics, but they do the drug testing as part of a compliance where they hope that they will be included at some point. So to the people out there at FIDE, if they're watching this, I apologize. I don't think it's going to happen. Good luck, but I'm not really a believer.
I wanted to tell you something. There's, there's an easy way to enhance cognition that doesn't involve drugs that is commonly used by, people who study and so on. So neurodegenerative disease, particularly Alzheimer's disease, is mostly treated by symptom management. And in Alzheimer's disease, what people encounter most is a loss of memory and inability to learn. So the drug that's most commonly used for Alzheimer's disease is called donepezil. And donepezil is a drug that inhibits the breakdown of a neurotransmitter in the brain that is very, very much involved in learning and memory. That neurotransmitter is called acetylcholine. So acetylcholine is broken down by an enzyme called acetylcholinesterase, and donepezil inhibits the activity of that enzyme, therefore allowing more acetylcholine to be in the brain. Now, of course, that's a drug, but there are other ways to enhance what we call cholinergic function in the brain. So one of the ways is acetylcholine is made out of choline that we ingest in our diet. There's a lot of choline in eggs and in liver, some other sources, but you can also take a supplement of phosphatidylcholine. So you can take one that's called sunflower lecithin. And the US recommendations are that males consume 550 milligrams of choline in their diet. You can take up to 1,000 and you'll probably notice some benefits. And when you take that choline, not all of it gets transported to the brain to be synthesized into the neurotransmitter acetylcholine. There's a supplement called alpha GPC, which is a kind of choline, but it seems that when you take between 100 to 300 milligrams of this supplement, which you could take once or twice a day, or there's no real danger with it, what happens is it releases stored choline in the body, which gets into the bloodstream and then gets sent through the blood-brain barrier into the brain to be synthesized into acetylcholine. So that's one thing. And then there are some other herbal supplements that act as acetylcholinesterase inhibitors. So for example, the ones I use are ginkgo, although apparently they're not working that well, so we just found out. One of the ones I use is ginkgo biloba, which, by the way, all of these have other helpful anti-inflammatory, antioxidant effects in the body. So one is called ginkgo biloba, one is called huperzine A, another is called berberine. These are the three I use. There's also a fourth one, but it makes people a bit drowsy. It's called Bacopa. Usually people use it if they want to enhance lucid dreaming before they sleep. All of these things will also enhance lucid dreaming if someone takes it before they sleep.
Right.
And there's also a class of things that are not drugs, but that the nootropics people on Reddit, if you ever heard of nootropics, they use them. They're called racetams. These work sort of through cholinergic function. Also, I don't use them personally. For me, these things, this is like optimizing cholinergic function. It helps with learning and stuff like that. It's not a super advantage, but it is quite useful.
Right. I think from my perspective, from a chess perspective, I wouldn't necessarily think of it as performance enhancing, but maybe performance optimizing, which I guess is a subtle distinction, but at least I would be personally okay with my opponent taking as much of this as they want to. And, maybe they're able to optimize their performance, but ultimately it will still be my mental abilities in chess versus their mental abilities. There is a lot of work among top players in optimizing diet and exercise and other things, obviously. And also, the top players will have a nutritionist for world championship matches and things like that, that help them take in the right things right before their game, during their game, and so forth, to make sure that they're able to perform over 5 or 6 hours or 7. The longest games can be even 7 or 8 hours, which is intense. If you imagine taking a test for 7 or 8 hours, right?
Are games that
be in that situation is intense.
I didn't even know there were games that lasted over an hour. Wow.
There's a lot of movement to speed up the game and to play more rapid chess. Online, you never have a 7-8 hour game. That's not a thing that anyone does online. But in the World Championship, something like that, then yes, games are that long. You'll typically have about 3 to 4 hours per side. The game might be shorter. They might draw the game relatively quickly, or it could just be a blowout for some reason. It might be done in a couple of hours, but you're looking at, a short game being something like an hour and a half, long game being over 7 hours, something like that.
Wow. And okay, we'll get into this because I'm going to ask you about game structure. Yeah, I'll just ask you in a little bit. But just so you know, the cholinergic thing is a nutritional thing. And,
right.
The other thing that's really conclusively shown to enhance cognition in people is eating a fat-adapted diet. So when they're not eating carbohydrates and sugars in their diet, the brain function, when it functions off fat, is much more stable and clear. And this is across all studies. So if someone really wants to optimize their playing, they could 1 week before the game go on a ketogenic diet, and they'll function better in the game for sure. Almost everybody has that experience. Okay, so I want to ask you a couple of more things. So I'm going to skip one. I want to ask you, how gender mixed is the community?
So in terms of being gender mixed, like male and female players play in the same tournaments for the most part.
What I mean to say,
the proportion is just massively different. It depends on where you're measuring this, like what countries, obviously, and so forth. I want to say that the percentage of female players in the United States is like 17% of total players, something like that. I might be even a little bit high there. I'm not sure. But it's something in that ballpark. So it's a relatively or very low percentage relative to male players. And in some countries, of course, the number of players might be 5% or even less, right? So there's just a lot fewer women playing chess. There's a lot of interesting research about male and female chess players, and if there's some difference in the way that they think about the game, if there's any kind of difference in approach. Some suggest that the difference in achievement at the top level is just because there are fewer women playing chess. So there's never been a female world champion, for example. But there is Judith Polgar, who got up to the top 10 in the world, has tremendous achievements. But that's really the only player that you can cite and say, they were absolutely a 100% top player. There have been 34 female grandmasters, And like I mentioned earlier, something like 1,700 male grandmasters. And I might be a little off. I said 34. It's in the 30s, something like that. Every single one is alive today, actually, which is kind of interesting as well.
Can I ask you a little bit about something you just mentioned? The Polgar lady. There are actually 3 sisters, right? And they were raised in the unconventional. There's a legendary story about the father putting an ad in the newspaper, asking for a wife who would. He wrote a book called "Make Me a Genius." He wanted to raise his children to be. Is this a real story?
Yes. So there's Judith or Judith, Sophia. I'm blinking and I'm going to kill myself. And Susan. So all 3 had tremendous achievements in chess. And Judith retired in, I want to say 2013, maybe 2014. But she had, I think, largely stepped away from her competitive activities maybe in the mid 2000s when she had a family. And that can certainly be one of the reasons that you might see a difference in achievement at the top level for female and male players, right? There aren't male players who've got the achievements and stature that Judith does that then step away when they have a kid, right? Their wife is watching the kid and they're still playing top tournaments. So the challenges for a female player at that phase are obviously really difficult, although Judith still performed at an amazing level. But when she had a family, I think you didn't see her continuing to compete at the top level in as many events. Probably she was at the same level for a while, but I think you definitely see a change in her life. I think she would point that out as well. I think she did point that out in her book about her chess playing career. So she played until she retired in 2013, 2014. Susan is still active and is managing teams Webster University in St. Louis. And I think Sophia stepped away a long time ago, and she's got a very happy family life. Judith is also still very involved in chess and organizes the Global Chess Festival and other various chess activities. She also does some commentary and things like that for major chess tournaments and so forth. We organized a simul with her on chess.com a couple of years ago. So I got to work with her a little on that, and that was just fantastic because she's just an amazing person to connect with.
She's the first female grandmaster in history, or no?
She is the 3rd female grandmaster in history. Before her, there was Nona Gaprindashvili from Georgia and Maya Chevernanidze. But both of them were, generations older, or at least one generation older. She became a grandmaster at the age of 15, and she was the youngest grandmaster in the world at the time, which is a huge achievement. For a long, long time, I think 34 years, Bobby Fischer was the youngest grandmaster that had ever existed. And the next youngest was like 18 years old, something like that. And then she became a grandmaster and beat his record after 34 years, which is just incredible. It's a testament to her absolutely generational skill and talent for the game. I think that some people who I would strongly disagree with might criticize Judith as being famous just for being a strong female player, but her achievements, if you take gender out of the equation entirely, are still just, tremendous. Again, beating Bobby Fischer's record after 34 years, being a top 100 player in the world at the age of 12, beating just about everybody in the chess world at some point, and playing many, many beautiful attacking games as well.
Well, we also have to say they must be a testament to the father and the mother who raised their children with, just to be clear for the audience,
Right.
The father published a book called Make Me a Genius before their birth or when they were very young. And he was a psychologist of some kind. And he basically thought that you could create a world-class expertise in a field through nurture. And he originally planned to raise his daughter or his first daughter to interest her in mathematics, but she became interested in chess on her own. And one of his fundamental ideas was that you couldn't force a child to go in one direction, but you the carrot, but not the stick kind of thing, where you could guide this, And his all three daughters became grandmasters, and of course, lose.
Sophia didn't become a grandmaster, although
There's
she
a lot
might
of
have
facts
been.
I'm missing. Yeah.
No. She also had some amazing success. She won a tournament in Rome in, I want to say, 1989, where she scored just a tremendous score. I can't remember if it was a perfect score or like a half point short or something, but it was a huge achievement. But her interest in chess seemed just more limited than Sophia and Judith's, and she just stopped at some point. But you're absolutely right. Of course, their father set out with the goal of them being tremendous chess players. I think he might have had a mathematics background as well. I'm not sure about that.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah.
Right. So I don't know if he would have been open to like them getting into mathematics or something else, or if he was like just determined to send them down the chess path, or if that was a path they showed interest in, and then he took them down that path. But from a very, very young age, they were homeschooled and they had coaches coming in all the time, and they had these massive flashcard systems, and they did training with the best players in the world, including Bobby Fischer, who was in Hungary at the time. It's definitely a very unique and interesting story. It's like a supercharged homeschooling with a heavy focus on chess, basically.
Yeah, it's very inspirational for anyone out there that has children and wants to see what could happen. Hopefully,
I'm not even sure that Judith and Susan would necessarily recommend that path for a child.
That's what I was going to say.
But
I don't know how happy they are about the pressure maybe growing up that way. I'll be very curious to know.
Well, I having read Judith's biography and met and interacted with Judith at least slightly, I think she's very happy with where she is in life. But I don't know that she would necessarily recommend this kind of focused path. I think she would at least submit some reservations, if nothing else. But I certainly could never speak for her. And she does speak just a little bit about it in her book. And I think she's still tremendously happy and mentions that in her book. But it's a very unique way of life with some pros and some cons.
I'm glad you told me she has is it an autobiography or a biography?
It is an autobiography. It's 3 books.
Wow.
It is very much focused on chess, but she does, discuss, other aspects of her life and her upbringing and the situation that you mentioned, from her perspective, as a child, not from her father's perspective as an instructor and as an educator. But it's mostly focused on chess with, elements of the story and pictures about from her family life and so forth.
I'll check it out. Thank you so much for telling me about that. One final broad question before we get into the game, the things I really I hope you can help me with understanding. So sure. One final question. I just want to know, do the players tend to peak at a certain age or like within one player's lifetime? Right.
That's a really good question. I'm sure that someone could map that out. So the answer must be yes. What I've heard, and I don't know how well the data supports this, although I think that there's certainly an indication that this is somewhat true, is that you kind of peak, maybe you achieve like 90% of your potential within 8 years after picking up the game. And there's certainly exceptions. But if you pick up the game at 5 and you're very, very talented, probably by about 13, you're close to Grandmaster or you are Grandmaster if you're a really talented 5-year-old. And then after you're there, you're still grinding. Maybe you're at that Grandmaster level to get to the top and challenge for the world title. But you've achieved kind of 90%. That extra 10% is really important and hard, but something like 90% in the first 8 years. That's also roughly true for me. So like if you take my first tournament game, it depends on where you kind of take it. The first time I got to play a tournament when I was like 15 or when I was really kind of getting more into it when I was like 10, but you add like 8 years, I think that I had achieved something like 90%, of my level. And I pushed through to master beyond that, which I'm very proud of. But, I achieved a lot of the learning and development in the first 8 years. And so you can look at different players who've picked up the game at different ages, and you can see them kind of developing and peaking a little earlier and later. And certainly every single player is different, but I think you see some of that. Then beyond that, players like Magnus already at like the age of 19, he's like the best player in the world, right? And he's probably still developed beyond that still, so that in maybe his early 20s, you might say that he was at his peak. He's still very close to it today. If he's not there, he's maintained his peak for a really long time. But I think that you get to the peak earlier in chess than you might think at a relatively young age. I also think, and maybe not everyone else would agree with this, I think that you sustain your level in chess for a long time. Like Vishy Anand, I think, has sustained his level well into his 40s. And I think that that's actually fairly typical if a player's remaining active and competitive, that they manage to maintain their level into their 40s. But what is often happening is that new players are coming up who have more technology, more information, and they're surpassing you, right? So Magnus Carlsen surpassed Vishy Anand, but I don't think Anand lost a step at the time that he lost the world championship title. I just think that Magnus Carlsen was a new player who, as he was coming up, had tremendous talent, even more resources, and so he achieved a higher level. But I don't think you can necessarily say that Anand was any less strong in the years after he lost the world championship versus the years before. And I think you see that a lot. It feels to a lot of players like they're losing a step, but I'm not sure that's true. It's just that the people behind them are really, impressive.
That's really interesting and a useful, an inspirational or attractive element about the game. Can I ask you also, have you come across any people that past the age of 30 or 40 get into the game and can become masters?
Yeah. So the problem is that you probably don't have time to devote to the game like you would if you picked the game up at a younger age. Mm-hmm. So if you're kind of achieving most of your development in the first 8 years after you pick up the game, I think that you can still pick up the game at 40 and become a master kind of over the next 8 years. It's going to be more difficult for the reasons that you mentioned earlier, neuroplasticity, other things. It's not my specialty, but I think that you can. And I think that there's cases where this has happened. The problem is if you're picking up the game at 40, you probably have a family, a job, a career, whereas the really talented kids who are picking up the game when they're in elementary school, they have a lot of time around school, probably in school when they're working on chess, right? And in a lot of cases, if they're really talented, then their family's going to homeschool them and take them to international tournaments. That happens for all kinds of super talented kids all around the world. And you're just not going to have that kind of opportunity later in life. So there's not very many examples that you can look at and say, this player picked up the game at this age and really devoted himself to the game, in his midlife. And we can see, how much he achieved. There's just very, very little data.
Can I also ask you, in the early 20th century until now, has the game actually progressed in the sense that are there newer, if you were to take a champion from the modern times and make him face an 1850s champion or 1880s champion, would he or she face someone like, is there a technological, in terms of strategy improvement that can't be passed? Or is it the people?
Chess players have gotten better at chess throughout history. And there are probably going to be some chess players who see this, listen to this, and get angry about what I'm about to say. But if you dropped me into 1850 as a master, like nowhere on the top world rankings, I think I would be able to compete extremely closely, maybe beat everyone except Paul Morphy, who was an incredible talent and was well ahead of his peers. outside of Morphe, in the years right before that and afterwards, I probably think that I beat everyone. Maybe I'm a little overestimating, but I would certainly be able to perform very, very well. Whereas, now there's all kinds of grandmasters. And if you took a grandmaster and dropped them back into that time, most grandmasters would just destroy the field. So we have just tremendously advanced our knowledge. And I'm not trying to in any way diminish the achievements of players like Paul Morphy, because they were achieving incredible chess levels without any books, right? Without computer programs, without chess engines, working off of, very little available community knowledge about the game. So they did amazing things, absolutely amazing things. But just in terms of raw skill, we have gotten so much better at the game. Every 10 years, we're significantly improving. So I think, you just take it decade by decade and you can kind of track the improvement. I think that you mentioned as we were connecting that you had been watching my video on the chess.com channel where we show the ratings of players throughout history. So those are not actually ratings that are kept by FIDE, right? Which FIDE started keeping ratings in 1970. And so from 1970 on, I think 1970, but certainly really close to there, we have FIDE ratings for the top players. And so we have some established metric, and we can see that the ratings have increased. And some people would argue that this is because of inflation in the system. And I would argue it's because the players are getting better. We at chess.com took really strong chess computers. We went over the games of the former world champions and some other really incredible players, and we assessed how they were performing against the computer recommendations. And we derived an estimated rating from that. And using that, we were able to show that the level is just consistently increasing across time. There is a lot of erratic kind of noise, and you'll see leaps when Bobby Fischer appears on the scene, and he's kind of a generation ahead of the players around him, right? It takes another generation for players to get to his level at his peak, but you're able to track the development of chess skill across the decades by looking at how players are performing relative to kind of perfect play from the engine. And it's absolutely something that's advanced across the decades.
I'm wary of our time because I've actually we've talked a lot and we're barely at the topic of the game. So I wanted to ask you, how much do you feel like maybe we should cut this short and do a second interview where we talk about the game and your recommendations, or would you like to power through and maybe make it a bit more brief?
I'm okay either way.
Okay.
Really up to you.
Okay, absolutely. No, so I wanted to ask you about the game so I can understand a little bit about the things that don't make sense to me as an outsider. So to begin, I always hear that there's some advantage or disadvantage playing white or black. Well, at the very least, I always see that there are instructions saying, like, if you start with white, you do certain things, and if you start with black, you do certain things. Is that just based on who starts first? And is there an advantage to starting first or to defending, I guess?
Yeah, there are chess openings, which are established patterns with which you can begin the game. There is a definite advantage to having the white pieces. Although the top computer engines, the top, chess programs would show today that the game is a draw with best play. So if you play perfectly, the game is balanced. But statistically, white is going to score something like 54% or 55% out of the possible points that you can have from play, right? With black scoring the remaining points. And you're kind of splitting the draws, right? You say if there's 20% draws, we'll just give 10% to white, 10% to black, right? You're just splitting that percentage. So there's a definite advantage to playing white, but it's not huge, right? Black's certainly going to score a fair share of wins. It's a little bit like having the serve in tennis, maybe not as significant advantage, but that kind of advantage, right? You have the initiative. and the ability to kind of dictate the play a little bit more when you have the white pieces. And yeah, there's openings that you'll learn. White gets kind of the first choice. Do I want to begin with the king pawn or the queen pawn? There are a couple other moves that are quite reasonable that you could start with. And then black's going to kind of narrow it down further and say, okay, you started with advancing the king pawn. So I'm going to respond by pushing my queen pawn forward. I'll play the Scandinavian defense or something. And as both players make decisions, you just continue to define the character of the game a little bit. And probably most players will be in a unique position by around move 10. And probably most players will not know that they're in a position that's been played before by around move 5 or 6 or something like that. It'll be new to them, but probably some other players have played it.
That was a great breakdown. Okay, I had no idea about. So what I did notice though is that because I've never read a book about chess except for the Immortal Game, which is a history book, which I highly recommend.
Okay. Oh, interesting. Okay.
It's a really enjoyable book, but it's a short book. But I've tried to. When I was younger, I thought maybe I can read a book. But the thing is, the chess books, a lot of them are on openings. I don't even know if there are any on Endgame, but they're like they specify. There's a lot of books on openings. So I want to understand why. Is it because there's limited moves that you can do in the beginning? So they're like sort of algorithms of ways you can start your game. Is that what it is?
So at one point, I heard someone say that the category of chess books was the largest category of nonfiction books. I think that had to be absolute rubbish, but I heard that at some point. However, there are more chess books that have been published than I think almost anyone would think there are. There are many, many thousands of chess books that have been published on different topics. There are absolutely a lot of opening books, and that's because it's just one of the most marketable books. I mean, most chess books don't sell a ton, but a strong player who specializes in an opening can write about that opening, and there will be a market for it, right? There'll be players who are like, yeah, I play that, and I really want to know what this Grandmaster is going to recommend. It'll help me out. It's something that players like because they enjoy the fact that if they read this book, they will get to use this knowledge. The game has to start somewhere. Whereas if you read a book on strategy, and there are tons of great books on strategy, it's just not as clear to a newer player where you're going to use that knowledge. Now, realistically, you get to use that knowledge all the time, but it's just a little bit more nebulous. Endgames are actually really useful too, and there are endgame books. And that's kind of similar to the opening in that there are specific things that if you study them, they will come up as the material reduces. You're going to see certain things come up again and again, whereas the middle game is much more nebulous and each position is much more unique, right? But there are books on all of this stuff, books on combinations and tactics and checkmates and so forth.
We're really going to need your recommendations, actually. So, but one thing
I have a blog that I'll share with you. 25 books guaranteed to improve your chess, and it breaks books down by different levels. Like if you're absolutely starting out, here are some good opening books and so forth. But I'll give you a link, and people can check that out if they're interested.
I'll put it on the description. That would be really great. I'll just write it down so I can remind you. Okay. So thank you so much. So let me ask you some more questions about, we discussed openings. One thing I never really understood. So what makes someone want to move the pawn 2 steps ahead in the beginning instead of 1? It sounded fun to me when I was a child to move 2 steps ahead. I thought I was progressing more, but I see a lot of expert kind of people that are not doing that. What makes someone decide to do that other than aligning them diagonally?
So I think you're touching on a huge strategic topic in chess, and I'll try and break it down very quickly. One of the first great players, a guy named Francois-André Danican-Philidor from France, late 1700s. He played chess in Paris. He played blindfold chess, which is when you don't see the board, you have to hold the entire position in your head, which blew people's minds at the time. Anyway, up until they closed the Paris Chess Club during the French Revolution, He was active, and he wrote a book about chess, and he had a famous quote, "Pawns are the soul of chess." And that statement still has a lot of truth. The pawns are the smallest piece on the board, but you have 8 of them, and they kind of define the territory and the strategic struggle that is in play in every game. Chess is a game in which you're playing for checkmate, right? The goal of the game is to checkmate the opponent's king. But at a higher level, prior to that, chess is a game of 64 squares. And it's really a game where you're trying to control territory. And if you don't have control over the board, you're not going to checkmate your opponent's king, right? Not unless he does something crazy, right? So you would need control over the board to start. So by advancing your pawn 2 squares forward, you gain more control over territory. So in theory, you kind of always want to advance your pawn 2 squares forward on the first move. But on the other hand, you can overextend, right? If you're only pushing your pawns, they're improperly supported by your pieces. You can imagine that if you were a military leader throughout history and you sent in the foot soldiers with no artillery support, they would get blasted to pieces. That's kind of what would happen if you just kept pushing your pawns. And the other element is that a pawn can never move backwards. They're the only piece that can't do that. So you have to be aware that every time you push a pawn, you're giving up some control. Like the pawn controls squares, and you're giving up permanently control over those squares that the pawn was attacking. And so if you advance recklessly, you might give up control of some key points. So that's really a general strategic breakdown that will kind of cover the whole of pawn play. But I think that it gives a bit of an idea of the strategic nature of the struggle anyway.
But, well, I'll ask you more about books in a second. Okay, I wanted to ask you, I was going to ask you about Endgame, but I think you sort of summarized the reasons why Endgame is studied on its own because of the 2 elements of the checking and checkmating, as well as having fewer pieces. But
I'll mention one other thing about studying endgames. The great world champion, Jose Capablanca, who was famous for being good at endgames, said, I'm not quite sure about the exact wording of the quote, but basically, if you want to learn chess, study endgames. And one reason for that is that you are seeing the pieces in their purest element. So if you're looking at a rook endgame, you have the rooks, and you really learn how the rooks work and function. Whereas when there are 64 squares on the board and 32 pieces, it's much more difficult to understand the role of the rooks specifically. So it's often suggested that the best place to start learning chess is by learning the endgames, but no one does that because you want to play games, right? So this is a theoretical world where you have like a child prodigy and you lock them in a room and you teach them a perfect pattern for understanding the game. You would start with the end game.
That's really fascinating and makes complete sense to me. Can I ask you, there's some people that, this has been done to me many times where people who are read chess strategies, they do some opening move that I don't understand what it is, and I've been checkmated in 3 moves or something like that.
Right.
Can this ever happen to intermediate players, or does this only happen to novices or the unacquainted? Like, are there
a very quick checkmate?
Yeah, are there algorithms that you can use that can quickly trick an intermediate player into being checkmated in a few moves, or is this only the case with the unacquainted?
There are absolutely, I don't know that I would say algorithms, but there are opening traps. Opening traps are definitely a thing where you've got an idea that maybe you repeatedly use to catch unaware players of potentially a wide range of levels. The complexity of the trap would vary based on your level and your opponent's level. But opening traps are definitely a thing. The idea that checkmate would happen and you would not have seen it coming is really something for a new player. Even an intermediate player is almost always going to see the checkmate coming, although they might realize too late like that they're not really able to effectively defend. But it's unlikely that checkmate actually happens on the board and the game ends and they didn't see it coming at all in the early phase of the game. So there are definitely traps. They kind of escalate in complexity as you improve. But the idea that, checkmate just stuns you is mostly something that happens to new players, because after a few games, people have dropped it on you, and you'll know to defend F7.
When you use the word trap, do you mean that there is an element of the person's strategy that depends on the other person's response? So you're trying to elicit a certain kind of move from them so that you can then trap them, right?
Right. Absolutely. I think that's a very, very accurate way to describe it. One example would be Legal's checkmate, Legal's trap. People could look that up on Wikipedia or something. And it's an example where you sacrifice your queen, and really the trap has already been sprung when you sacrifice your queen, and it's very early in the game, like move 6. And your opponent takes the queen, kind of falling into the trap, and then you have a checkmate in 2. And it's very, very pretty. It's given in a lot of beginning books.
This has happened to me. This is one of the yeah, very unpleasant. Yeah,
right. So they're kind of like, please, hoping that you'll kind of comply and they'll get to spring that trap.
A broad question. Are there people who just play online and without reading any kind of books or anything like that just become better? Or do you need some kind of tutoring or teaching through a book or through watching someone's media to learn? And does that depend on someone's maybe natural aptitude in general? Or is it a test-specific thing?
That's a huge, huge topic. I think the topic of how people learn best, right, is a massive area in education research, right? And some people are supposed to learn particularly well visually. Some people learn really well auditorily. Some people learn by doing. The people who learn by doing are the people who will benefit the most by just playing a lot of games. I would say that you can find strong chess players online and offline who've learned in very different ways. Some by just playing a lot of games, some through really effective coaching. Now, playing is always a very important part. It's just that the mix varies a lot. And I don't know that there's a best system for all players. I think that for the most part, what matters is that you're enjoying the game and you're learning, and there are lots of different ways to enjoy the game and learn. I do think that there are some things that can help. Reading a really good in-game book as you get really strong is going to do a lot and fill in a lot of knowledge much more effectively than trying to learn it by yourself would do. But, for the most part, you can kind of learn a lot by doing.
And to testament to your point is that I live in California, where I think California may have the most prison population in the U.S. I'm not sure, but there's definitely a lot of ex-prisoners. You just come across them living in Los Angeles. Mm-hmm. And I've been surprised to notice that a lot of the people who've spent over 5 years in prison are, to me, incredible chess players. Like, I can't even, there's no I don't play chess, but I know how to play, and they are really phenomenal at playing chess. And these are people, some of them who can't read, genuinely illiterate, so they've never read any book on chess or anything like that. Actually, a lot of them learn to read in prison, but they play very well just from having played each other in prison for a long time. Mm-hmm. I wanted to ask you, how important is it to learn the notation of chess? How important is it in learning? I guess maybe for using books, is that important, or?
It is, absolutely. Reading books and getting effectively learning the material in the books does depend on your understanding of notation. For the most part, though, I would say that you're going to learn notation as you get into the game. So it's not something that, once you, know how it works, that you're basically breaking the board up into a grid of squares. I mentioned the F7 square earlier, which is where early checkmates regularly happen. You just know that, and then you just get better and better as you play the game and you watch YouTube videos or read books or whatever, and you see the notation, being used. For example, in the introduction, you mentioned that I have a company called Strategery. Right now, with COVID, it's basically on hiatus because we're not teaching in schools anymore. But I've spent the last 5 years or so teaching a lot of chess in schools to very, very young kids. So I've taught something over 500 kids how to play the game. And notation is a thing that I'll teach. And it's a thing that I kind of show them once and we never work on it again, but they will just get better at it as we go. So at the beginning of the year, maybe third lesson or something, I'll just kind of briefly mention, okay, we can give a name to this square, right? The board has A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So this is the F7 square. And that's about it. And by the end of the semester, they'll be able to call out moves and notation. So I'll say, what move would you suggest here? Can you find the checkmate? And, a 5-year-old kid will be like, let's move the queen to F7, right? And because he's not practicing the notation, he's just there and we're using the notation and he's got it. So I don't have to make an additional effort to help him process that.
So you get a visual, basically a visual impression of where the numbers and letters are. Okay, that's great. Also, two last things I wanted to ask about the game. One is, I noticed there's many kinds of tournaments. Like there's, like Kasparov was famous for playing multiple people at a time, but there's also people that play games in a row, or there's also timed games. I don't know what the time, because you said there are games that last 7 hours, but then I see that there's a clock and they're clicking so what are the kinds of games, and is timing important, and how? Sorry, that's a very broad question, but.
The term we would use is time control, and chess is played at a wide variety of time controls. So the most serious tournaments are the over-the-board tournaments, which haven't existed for 6 months. I think we're going to have like our first big over-the-board tournament in October in Norway. In those tournaments, the time control can vary, but you're looking at something like 4 to 5 hours for the game, for the longer games. Could be even longer for a world championship. There's, variations. Like you don't have the exact same time control for this tournament and the next tournament. They'll vary a little bit, but that's the frame that you're looking at. So those are considered the most important tournaments, considered the most prestigious tournaments. But on the other hand, a lot of those games are drawn because the players play so well. Like the level of play is really, really high. And so you see that most of the top players are going to struggle to get a win against each other. And in these top tournaments across maybe like a 10-game tournament where everybody's playing 10 games, maybe the winning score could be +2, meaning someone wins 2 games and they draw 8. So you're seeing a lot more movement to faster time controls. There are more and more tournaments that happen at what are called rapid chess time controls, which might be something like 15 minutes, 25 minutes per side, maybe with a little extra time that you get per move called an increment. I make a move, I get 2 seconds added to my clock. So I never exactly run to 0. Right, I'll always have time to continue to play if the game goes really long. And these are becoming really popular. You see a lot more decisive games, meaning won or lost games instead of draws, which is interesting. And you also just see more mistakes, which is also interesting. Like you want to see the players play well. You want to feel like they can play, something approaching their best chess. But you don't want to feel like they're never making mistakes. Or if they make a small mistake, it's not going to be enough to lose the game. So you're seeing a lot more of that. And then online, what most people play is blitz chess or even bullet chess. And blitz chess can be like a 3-minute game, 5-minute game, up to about a 10-minute game. I think on chess.com, we're about to change that to be a rapid game. But that's kind of the threshold you're looking at. A bullet game is a 1-minute game, meaning you have 1 minute to complete all your moves. The level of play is really low there. The best players in the world can play a pretty good bullet game. But for most people, it's just a frenzy, but it's still fun, right? So you have that huge range where you've got these bullet games, happening just like it's like eating popcorn. You just keep doing it, right? And you have a lot of it. And then you've got these classical games that are very serious. There's a very high level. There's very few mistakes. And, the chess community kind of runs the gamut there. Everybody's participating in different ways. Some people specialize. But yeah, we have that spectrum that people are engaging in.
And just for the viewer to know, one of the things I read in academic research is that the more expert players spend much less time on the opening moves and on the closing moves than they do, it's called response time, RT in the literature. They spend more time in the middle of the game, which I guess has more possible iterations and maybe more unique to them.
Correct. At the top level, the opening is going to be something that the two players have likely memorized. Some openings are more given to memorization because they might be kind of sharper, more aggressive. Often more aggressive openings will lead to more forced responses for your opponent. So you might know the first 30 moves of a game. Now, most of the top players try to avoid that because they want to outplay their opponent. So they're going to try to find an opening that feels like something that's been less studied, where they can take it into fresh territory earlier, maybe by around move 10. But they're going to know a lot of the beginning part of the game. A beginning player and intermediate player is not going to know nearly as much. And yeah, when they get to the end game, they may know not that specific position, but they'll know how to play that type of end game because they'll have had an end game with the same pieces, same pawns before, and so they know the strategy.
Which brings us to another thing I wanted to know, which is that when you say you describe some in your videos, you describe somehow styles of playing. What is a style of chess playing? So when you characterize one of the great chess players, how does someone develop a style? I don't understand what a style is, and of course, being so unacquainted with it.
Right, that's a great question. Chess enthusiasts love the idea of style. And I think the very top players think that the idea is maybe a little bit a little bit inflated. So the best players in the world are really good chess players, right? So if there is a forced mate in 5 moves, then players with very different styles are basically always going to find that same forced mate, right? If there is a clearly good move, then they're all going to find that clearly good move. The style part, I think, exists maybe in the margins a little bit where the choices are more subjective, right? Do I want to pick a pawn up in game where I think I'm likely to win, but it's going to be a technical task? Or do I want to avoid winning that pawn and keep more pieces on and press the attack, which feels like a pretty good attack, right? So those two choices could be a very, very close value, right? And the more aggressive player is going to pick that attack every time, right? And the player who's more positional, more of a technician, is going to pick the end game like every time. And so you'll see that. You'll have players like Anatoly Karpov who are technical players and are going to pick the end game most of the time. And you'll have players like Mikhail Tal, who's super popular. There's all kinds of great YouTube videos on his games, who is regularly aggressive, and he's going to pick the attack almost every time. But that's still like 10% of their choices, right? 90% of the time, they're probably going to pick the same move because they both understand that that's the best move in the position, right? The style is in the margins.
That makes a lot of sense, yeah, because there must be some optimal route, and if they're really good at solving for it, they would come to the same conclusion.
Right. I wouldn't say there's an optimal route in every position at all, but there's a limited set of really good choices in a position. In some cases, there's only one good choice. In some cases, there are no good choices, right? You can be totally busted, but yeah.
Okay, so we come to the part of the interview which was going to be hopefully the most helpful to myself and other listeners or viewers, which is I never knew how to. Now we know about your blog post that has a list of recommended books for different experiences of playing, but generally I wanted to ask you your advice, having in your case sort of been intimately involved with the game your whole life. most of my viewers are above the age of 30 and below the age of 50. And I wanted to know, essentially, if you could give us a guide to how to learn the game. And maybe not only that, but also your impressions on one, how often or how one should approach training. So both acquiring information. Now, we talked earlier about the potential to just play the game and learn.
Yeah.
I think that, just from first principles, this cannot be the most efficient way, because the point of a book is to summarize some patterns you may notice in the game. So as long as you can remember what you read in the book, hopefully it'll save you a little bit of time with the playing of the game itself. But maybe I'm wrong.
So let me try and present a few different paths if I can. I mean, I work at chess.com and we have a lot of resources. I'll mention some other resources though, but if you're trying to start out just by learning the rules of the game, chess.com/lessons is designed to be that. It's got video content followed by interactive challenges. So it'll start you out with, how do I move the king? Then how do I move the rook, and so forth. And you can skip ahead if you know how the pieces move and start filling in some basic strategy blocks. But there's about 132 starting lessons that we have. So if you watch all of those, you'll be up to like an intermediate knowledge level. Now, you got to practice to complement that, but the knowledge is really clearly laid out there. And you can do that on the website. You can do it on the app. And I'm really proud of the content that we've done there. So I can certainly strongly recommend that. If you like a book, I would consider yourself to be very lucky to learn the game through the Soviet Chess Primer, which is a book that basically you have to kind of know a little bit about chess to even hear of for the most part. So it's unlikely that most players get to start there, but it is a beautiful introduction to the game with all kinds of great examples that work for all levels. I enjoy some of the examples in there, but I still think if you don't know anything about chess, you're going to be able to get it, and it makes really nice instructive points. So I recommend that book. And there are also like YouTube series. I would also recommend John Bartholomew's series on YouTube that fills in the fundamentals. So those are ways that you can kind of just fill in the basic knowledge of the game. And I would definitely recommend doing that. It's good to learn by doing, but there's easy, low-hanging fruit here that's going to help you out. In terms of, practice, I think there are two components. The first is obviously play, and you want to play games and study games, like look over the games that you play. We have a tool called a game report on chess.com that can really help you out. So it'll show you like the key moments and say like, here was a missed win. And it'll let you try to find that. What did I miss? Oh, I could have taken this queen. I didn't see that, or there was just a really good defense. I couldn't find it. I just lost a piece here. So we have that. That's really useful.
But that sounds really fascinating. Does that mean while we're playing a game, right after the game on chess.com, we could do this, the diagnostic, so that we could
right.
It's only when you play the game on chess.com that after the game you can do that?
Right. There'll be a little button that says game report.
Wow.
And you can get that. And
this is
beginning players and the advanced players, all use that. Other sites have similar things, but it's a great way to go over your game right afterwards. So studying your games is really important. And the second thing in that kind of vein is to play games worth studying. Meaning don't play bullet chess, or if you're playing bullet chess, 1 minute chess or 3 minute chess, really fast games, that's just for fun. That's not providing, instructive value for the most part for a newer player. So playing something that's at least 10 minutes, preferably more like 15 minutes per side, which means that the total game time could be about 30 minutes maximum, is really good because you're going to have more time to think. Your decisions will be more clearly understood by you to start with, right? If you don't really know why you did anything, the clock was just ticking, it's really hard to learn from the decisions that you made. So playing those kind of games where you have some time to think and process your own decision making is really helpful, and then going over it afterwards. And you also want to play good peers who challenge you, not people who are going to crush you for the most part, honestly. Like playing against me, if you're a beginning player, isn't actually that useful because it's just not a representative game. Honestly, it's going to be over kind of quickly. And for the most part, I'm just going to exploit several errors fairly ruthlessly, right? But there's an infinite number of players who are at a similar level that you can play against on chess.com, and you'll get something out of it. Maybe fighting up a little bit can be valuable if you can find someone who's a little bit ahead of you, but not so much that you don't have a chance, right? They can be a good opponent too. And then the other thing is doing puzzles. And that is incredibly important. Solving forced checkmates, chess.com/puzzles is one of many databases online. We have almost 200,000 puzzles. I think in the next month, we're going to have 200,000 puzzles. And it's forced checkmates. It's capture the piece that's not defended in the position. Give a fork where you attack two pieces and you're able to win one of them, and so forth. But picking out those patterns is really important. At the beginning, most of your ability to succeed is based on, not leaving your opponent opportunities to checkmate you or to take your pieces and capitalizing on those opportunities yourself. And the puzzles really help you hone that in a very, very quick way, really building a lot of pattern recognition. So to sum up, 3 things, fill in your knowledge. I mentioned some ways to do that. Practice and review the games you play, and then do puzzles. And if you do those 3 things, you're going to improve really, really quickly.
You answered all my questions there. That was such a helpful guide. I really appreciate it. A couple of last things. So you said you have a guide, and I'll check it out obviously, but you have a guide of books to improve your play. Have you ever reviewed opening books and endgame books specifically? Or general strategy books, and could you, off the top of your head, maybe recommend your favorites in those 3 categories?
Sure. So opening books are kind of unique because, the quality does matter, but what matters really most of all is that the opening is something that you're interested in. You want to play that opening, and then the author did a good job with it. So honestly, I don't know that I would even recommend an opening book to a beginning player. I would say, go to the chess.com lesson section on the opening and learn the basic strategies. But you don't need a 200-page book on an opening. That's at least 190 pages more than you need. In the middle game and end game, also like a full book is maybe a bit much. That's why I mentioned the Soviet Chess Primer earlier. But to mention some books that do a really good job on those parts of the game, I like Learn Chess Tactics by John Nunn as a really good book that will fill in tactics that does start from the beginning. On the checkmate front, The Art of Checkmate maybe is a really good book that will help you fill in your checkmates. Strategically, there's a book on chess strategy. I don't remember the specific title, by Jeremy Silman. That's pretty good. On the in-game level, I also think Silman has a book, Silman's in-game book, and there's a very famous book, 100 in-games you must know, that would really take you well into an intermediate level. But those would be some books that are really good. I think you really want to be at an intermediate level before you're really getting the maximum out of like a full book on the end game, right? The Soviet Chess Primer is one book that will really be good for a beginner player that covers the gamut. And then you're at an intermediate level, and then you can dig in and you can start looking more at books that focus on a specific topic.
I feel like you're quite scholarly and interested in the history of chess. So I must ask you also, is there a book on the history of chess or chess players in particular that you might, because I'm the kind of person that I like history, so sometimes I get myself interested in a subject,
right,
by thinking about people and so are there any books that are like short biographies of the top players or anything of that nature? Other than The Immortal Game, which I highly recommend to everyone. It's a very nice book.
That's a great question. In terms of a specific history of the game, I am not aware of a book that really sets that out as its topic. I think it would be a great topic, but I'm not aware of a book that does that. Actually, maybe Sunil Weeramintri's recent book kind of did that. That might be one book that people could get. It kind of is a workbook, an introduction to the game that does cover a lot of the early history of the game. There's also a YouTube video that I haven't even seen. I just know it exists with like 2.8 million views. That's like a TED talk on the history of chess. So I can't necessarily recommend that, but you can check it out. I know that it is out there. In terms of a history of the greatest players, the masterwork is Gary Kasparov's collection, My Great Predecessors, but that's like 5 different volumes. It is amazing. It's fantastic, has brilliant games, covers all the top players, and you're seeing the perspective of one of the greatest players of all time. But it is a more advanced book. I know that they show that in the movie Queen of Katwe, which is a Disney movie that had, I'm forgetting the actors and actresses who are in it. But it's the story of Fiona Mutesi from Uganda, a young player, and she has that book and cherishes that. So I remember that being featured.
What are your favorite chess movies, if I might ask? Are there any movies that are somehow chess-centric, that are motivational or might interest people into the subject?
Queen of Katwe is pretty good. It's definitely not my favorite. It's, probably like 70% on Rotten Tomatoes or something, which is a good family movie. It's a good, solid movie that mostly gets the chess right, with a few kind of head-scratching moments when they try to make it particularly dramatic. But there are 2 classic movies about chess, I think. One is Searching for Bobby Fischer, which is just a fantastic movie, period. I can highly recommend it. I don't think you need to enjoy chess at all to enjoy that movie. And it also absolutely nails the chess details. It has Lawrence Fishburne in it, Ben Kingsley, and it's based on a book about a young child prodigy. And really, it's a story about, the kid's relationship with his father. So it's just a fantastic, fantastic movie that really gets the details right. The other movie that I would highly recommend is actually a documentary called Brooklyn Castle, about an independent school in New York City. When the documentary came out, it got a little bit of attention, but not nearly enough people saw it, I think. It got really great reviews. The members, the people who were portrayed in the movie were on The Daily Show with Jon Stewart, I think. And I think it's an absolutely fantastic documentary that follows this independent school in Brooklyn and their chess teams, attempt to claim a national title. And the story is just riveting, and the chess details are really well displayed. It really plays like a narrative movie and not a documentary.
Sam, I have to ask you one final thing, which is I'm curious, after all your years in the sport, when you play the game, do you still enjoy it during the game? Do you get some mild euphoria or exhilaration? Do you get surprised by moves your opponents make? And do you ever, it being somewhat your career, and you having described earlier in the conversation that to some degree you've reached close to your potential, is what you described. I mean, that's how I felt it. Do you ever feel like there's pressure on the game for you, or that, is it still enjoyable?
Yeah, absolutely. The game is very, very enjoyable for me. Some parts of the game maybe are not quite as enjoyable as they once were, but I enjoy a lot of different aspects of the game. The traveling to a tournament and competing in a multi-day tournament isn't quite as much fun for me as it once was. I try to do 1 or 2 in a year, and I do get something out of it, but sitting at a board for 5 or 6 hours, and then doing that again for like a total of at least 5 days, and maybe twice a day you're playing 2 5-hour games. That's hard, especially when I've got a family, want to be with my wife, want to be with my daughter. And if I have a really good tournament, maybe I gain 10 rating points or I win my section. I do get something out of it. Like I say, I did my last over the board tournament in January, and I probably would have done another one right about now. I usually play in the US Masters, but with COVID, that's not happening. So I enjoy it, but it's hard to kind of carve out that time for it. I do enjoy playing Blitz games online, but mostly what I really, really enjoy right now is like just looking at amazing games. Like I recently published games from the Computer Chess Championship on our chess.com YouTube channel. And I really just love looking at the ideas that the computers are coming up with, just insane concepts and sacrifices that I never would have considered. I really have a lot of fun doing my YouTube channel and looking over just some of the greatest games ever played by some of the greatest players. That's incredibly rewarding. So competitively, it is a little bit hard to enjoy the competition aspect as much when you have less time to commit there. So your results aren't as good as they once were. And when you've got other things that you care about, it's just hard to take that big chunk of time and commit that to a long competition. So that's a little bit less satisfying, but the other aspects, that I've enjoyed, which have really been a big part for me, maybe for other players, it's not such a big thing in terms of enjoying great games and great concepts. Those things I enjoy absolutely as much as I ever did. And I probably haven't gone a day without some kind of chess in a decade, right? It might be a little chess. Maybe I just make a move in a daily chess game. It might just be like flipping through a book and seeing notes on a great game from an author that I hadn't seen before or something like that. But there's probably some chess in basically every day for me.
That really speaks to the power of the game, and that's something that I'd like to enrich my life with as well. So Sam, I really have to thank you so much for spending your time with us on this evening. And you know what I'm going to do? First of all, you've got a very dedicated new subscriber to your channel, your personal channel, not just chess.com. I'll be watching all your videos and all your older videos. And as a hobby, I'm going to, without obviously being able to dedicate enough time, but I will be learning chess myself. So maybe in 6 months or a year or something, we could catch up again on the podcast, and I'll probably have a whole different array of questions for you. But I'll be following your videos, and I'm really grateful for you coming on our channel. Hopefully, the viewers listening to this can subscribe to Sam's private channel as well as chess.com's YouTube channel. The links will be in the description, and we can go on this journey together as middle-aged adults learning chess.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for talking with me. This is a pleasure. It's always a pleasure for me to discuss chess.
It's really, really very kind of you. Thank you so much. We'll be tuning. I'll also be reading your blog, which is very well written and very frequently updated. I'm very impressed. I don't do nearly as good a job with my own blog. All right. We'll see you soon, Sam. Thank you so much.
Thank you.